Goa, the smallest state in India, is situated on the west coast of the Arabian Sea, 600 kilometers south of Mumbai. It has an area of 3,700 square kilometers and a population of 1.4 million. Its 100 kilometers of coastline is part of the Konkan coast that stretches from Ratnagiri in the north to Mangalore in the south. Being in the tropical zone and near the Arabian Sea, it has a warm, humid climate, with temperatures rarely going below 20 degrees Celsius, and two main seasons, the wet, June to September, and the dry, October to May. Low-altitude plateaus and large valleys dominate the landscape behind the coast. The soil cover is made up of laterites, which are rich in iron oxides. It's of a reddish colour and good for agriculture. Goa's rivers flow from the Western Ghats, a mountain chain that borders the state on the east, and create large estuaries lined with mangrove forests. Most of the land in the valleys and along the estuaries is now converted to agricultural use. The laterite plateaus have thin soils and are therefore not good for agricultural purposes. They are mainly covered with open forest and patches of grassland. The sides of the hills and the small stream beds running down from them are richer in soil and are usually well wooded. Over 450 species of birds have been recorded in Goa, a very large number for such a small area. This can be attributed partly to the fact that more studies have been done in Goa compared to similar areas on the west coast of India, but mainly to the very special ecosystem created from the merger of the traditional Goan village, with its mango, coconut and cashew plantations, with remnant natural forests of the coastal belt. While geographically Goa is similar to the rest of the Konkan coast, the differences between it and its neighbouring states have been formed politically and lie in its Portuguese heritage. The Portuguese arrived in Goa in 1510. They were the first Europeans to set foot in India and also the last to leave just 50 years ago. Unlike the British, who were interested mostly in trade, the Portuguese mixed with the local people and converted them to Christianity. The capital city of Old Goa in its heyday had 110 churches and was the biggest colonial city in the world. The Indo-Portuguese architecture of the Goan village is unique and dates back to the 18th century. In 1761, Marquis de Pombal, a minister in office during King José's rule, proclaimed on behalf of the king that any difference between the rulers and the vassals would not be on the basis of colour, but on the basis of merit. The effect of this statement was that Goans were emboldened to build huge mansions on a scale as grand as their rulers. Although the harmonious symbiosis between West and East is reflected in many other aspects of Goan cultural life, its manifestation is most vibrant in the houses built in Goa during this phase. The focus of attention in Indo-Portuguese secular architecture was the facade. The Goan mansion was constructed with a row of windows arranged in a monotonous fashion, with the facade divided into horizontal mouldings with the cornice crowning the top story. The more elevated character of the top story was indicated by the use of gables, festoons, and ornate windows. These windows, with their special shutters made out of mother-of-pearl shells, collected from the shallow mangrove forests along the estuaries, are unique to Goan architecture. Another important feature of a Goan house is the balcão, which probably evolved from the Portuguese porch, and only established itself in the mid-19th century. In most Goan houses, the balcão has steps leading up to it, giving the impression of a formal entrance. It also functions as a transitional space between the public and private domains of the house. The Goan house was always built within a compound enclosed with a wall, clearly defining the private territory of the house from the public or comunidad land outside. The wall was usually built with laterite stones, sometimes carved into intricate designs. Gateposts with finials and animals perched on top gave it an imposing presence. Pass the gatepost and you step into the front garden. Perennial flowering shrubs like bougainvillea line the compound wall. The path leading to the balcony is lined with low bushes of hibiscus and borders of coleus. Dotting the garden in a haphazard way are odd bits and pieces of colourful ornament. The church was, and still is, the centre of the village. The churches were the first buildings to be built by the Portuguese invaders and inspired the Goans to develop their own unique style of architecture. Around the churches we can still find many of the old houses today, some of them run down and in very dilapidated condition, but all with gardens with large trees, mainly coconut, mango, chiku, jackfruit and tamarind. These trees are a key reason for Goa being a bird paradise, as many of them are very old and probably date back to the time of construction centuries ago. In some plots, the houses have crumbled and turned into ruins, and natural jungle has taken over, with ficus trees growing from the roofs of what were once mansion houses. These beautiful villages have become popular with both foreign visitors and Indians. Old houses have been bought up and renovated, and new villas are being constructed, some in the old Portuguese style. India's big development boom of the early years of the present century has also affected Goa. Property values have skyrocketed, and as a result most people cannot afford to build villas anymore, and the new constructions we see coming up today are mostly large housing estates. After the Indian Army liberated Goa in December 1961, many Hindus immigrated from neighbouring states, and the villages saw new wards created, with small houses being built, and the old deities that had been persecuted during the Inquisition a few centuries before, brought back and restored in newly erected temples. Most of the villages are built on the edges of the valleys in the foothills and face the flatlands which are used for rice cultivation. There's usually a source of natural water, like the spring in Saligao, with its famous brown wood owl, in every village. As with the rest of India, domestic animals, mainly cows and buffaloes, are allowed to roam around freely. Troops of common langurs sometimes come into gardens, but are usually chased away by the dogs. If you drive around, you will probably see some of them sitting on the roof of a house. Common mongoose can be seen in gardens, in forests and in fields. Civets are nocturnal and sometimes, sadly, are run over by cars. Reptiles are very well represented, with many kinds of lizards and snakes. These reptiles are most attracted to houses that keep poultry, or small animals like rabbits. Behind the village with its big old trees are the forests of the hill slopes, and these attract many forest birds to gardens with their fruiting trees, flowers and water sources. Old ruins become part of the forest and are excellent places for birds to hide and build their nests. The best way to attract birds to a garden is by setting up water plates, or bird baths, as they're called in some countries. The plate can be any size, but not more than an inch deep, so that small birds can stand in the water and wash. The water should be changed as often as possible. Birds prefer clean water if they can get it. Plates should be placed on poles or hung from trees to prevent predation by cats. Although some birds can come very close, It's recommended to put the plates 10 to 15 metres away from your favourite seating place, so as to give them a comfortable distance. Seeds will only attract a few birds like spotted dove and jungle babbler, as most Goan birds are insectivorous, but they do attract squirrels. We used water plates in 6 different gardens in 4 villages in making this film. Most of the birds we saw appeared in all gardens, but some were restricted to a single one. In houses without cats and dogs, you can also expect birds to come and nest in the verandas. The original forests have long since given way to cashew plantations, which are used to produce a local alcohol called fenny. In the peak of the colonial era, cashew plantations covered the hills. With the passing years, the old form of agriculture died out, and natural forest has slowly come back and mixed with the cashew trees. The fruits are harvested from mid-March to May. Before this, the cashew collectors opened paths in the forests in order to gain access to the trees and to collect firewood. These paths in otherwise inaccessible forest can then be used by birders. To produce fenny, the fruit has to be overripe. It's collected out in the plantations from the ground with a special stick and gathered in a specially designed depression carved into laterite rock. The fruit is then separated from the seed, the cashew nut, a dry fruit well known all over the world. A guy wearing Wellington boots then tramples the fruits to extract the juice. The juice is collected in an open barrel and left to ferment for a few days. The fermented juice is then transferred into a copper vessel fitted into a specially designed clay oven. Special care has to be taken to close the top so that steam cannot escape. Under the copper vessel is the space for a wood fire. The juice is heated in the oven until the steam escapes via a pipe fitted to the side of the copper vessel on the top of the oven. This is fed through a long coiled pipe immersed in cooling water in an oil drum and condenses into liquid called urak. Once urak is distilled a second time, it becomes cashew fenny. This is a legal distillation and a fee is paid to the excise department. When the product is ready, the still man fills the fenny into plastic containers and sells directly to bar owners. The natural trees of the forests of the coastal belt include teak, ficus, acacia, caraya, Indian laburnum, red coral tree, flame of the forest, and fishtail palm. There's also bamboo, but this is probably planted. 15 years ago, the Forest Department undertook large-scale monoculture plantation of Australian acacia in many areas. This tree is now dominating once barren hills as it seeds and spreads into all the forests of South India. This type of mixed forest, with some heavily wooded areas and some open patches with grass, is an ideal habitat for birds. Some of these forests have perennial water streams, but mostly the streams dry out by December. Generally, most of the trees lose their leaves by January, and by February they start to flower. Some trees, like the silk cotton and red coral trees, shoot out huge red flowers, and from the end of February for about a month, they are feasted upon by many bird species. After flowering, the trees fruit, and unless there's some rain during the hot season of April-May, mango rain as it's called locally, the trees will not leaf before monsoon. Since there are many kinds of trees, fruits are available year-round, with some species giving fruits several times during a year. Bees' nests are also a common sight in Indian forests and attract bee-eaters and honey buzzards. The bark of deteriorating and dead trees is home to insects and, as most of the forest birds in the coastal belt of Goa are insectivorous, is their main food source. Various types of orchid festoon the trees, but only flower for a short time in late May, just before the monsoon. When the monsoon does arrive, the trees leaf very quickly, and within a few days of the first serious rain, new grass starts to emerge. Soon after that, the access paths cleared by the cashew collectors get overgrown, and access to the forest becomes increasingly difficult. We had long wanted to compare the size of the forested area with the agricultural and the residential in the coastal belt. The opportunity came when my friend Kiko Batuzzi, who's a professional paramotor pilot in his home country Italy, came to visit with all his equipment. I sent Kiko to fly above Baga Creek and Arpora Woods, two of the most famous birding sites of Goa. On a second mission, he flew east from my home village of Asagao to Mapsa and then back west via the Sealim wetlands to the Chapora estuary, and then east again over the hills north of Sealim, south of Chapora River. After studying the material Kiko brought from his GoPro camera, standard equipment for paragliding pilots, we realized that although a lot of it is Australian acacia plantation, the forested area covers as much as 70% of the total landmass, with many patches of natural forest that dwarf better-known birding sites like Baga Hill and Arpora Woods. The majority of the forest birds of the coastal belt of Goa are residents. Some, like black kite and green bee-eater, make short migrations during the monsoon and only return at the end of August. Others, like the greenish warbler and Nilgiri wood pigeon, are winter visitors. Summer is noted especially for cuckoos, with grey-bellied, banded bay and drongo cuckoo arriving in April, and pied cuckoo when monsoon starts. All these birds are highly vocal. In rare cases you can find juvenile cuckoos in winter, but then they're silent. Places with perennial streams, like the forest that climbs up from the lake at Arundel Beach, can attract birds like Malabar whistling thrush and brown wood owl. Winter is the main breeding time for raptors. The most noticeable is the white-bellied sea eagle. This bird usually uses the same nest year after year. It starts its breeding activity in October. By December, one or two immature birds may be seen in the nest, and by February they start to fly. Immature birds have brown plumage, which is gradually replaced by white at the age of 5 to 6 years. They usually stay around the nest until they can fly well. The most famous nest in Goa was in Arpora Woods. This nest collapsed after a big storm on 2nd of April 2008, but was built again and was used until last year. I also know of a nest in Chapora village behind the general store, and there's a very accessible nest on a high casuarina tree on Ashwin Beach. Another raptor that breeds in Goa's coastal forests is the changeable hawk eagle. Unlike the white-bellied sea eagle that can nest anywhere, this is a true forest bird and is usually heard more than it is seen. Here in the coastal belt it breeds in deep forests or on high trees in villages that are surrounded by forest. As its name suggests, the colouring of this eagle comes in different variations and can be almost totally white. It breeds between November and June and does not usually use the same nest every year. The nest, made of dry sticks, is very large and usually sits high on the tree. I've always observed a single chick in the nest in late March. The chick leaves the nest in early May, but stays around the same vicinity. The hornbill family is represented by 4 species in South India. As the forests of the coastal belt of Goa are in general deprived of exceptionally large trees or wide tracts of deep forest, it's surprising to find them here at all. Although rare, all 4 species have been recorded. While the 2 small grey hornbills are vagrants, the pied hornbills are seen regularly, with 4 individuals of Malabar pied being seen regularly on the hills between Asagao and Siolim. Many times they come into gardens and sometimes even onto balconies. Since these birds have now been seen year-round and juvenile birds spotted in August, it's very likely that they've taken up residence in the area, although I'm not aware of any nest being located. Much less frequent than Malabar pied, a pair of great pied hornbills sometimes can be seen, especially in coconut groves. We once watched the pair in Asagao demolish the top of a dead coconut tree while searching for insects, lizards and tree rats. September would be the best time in Goa for those who want to see the beauty of the state. The temperature is ideal and there's little rain. The air is clear and everything is green with many wildflowers and butterflies. This is the time for vagrants, but birds are scarce in the forest, and birding is best in wetlands and along the coast. By October, temperatures rise significantly, but there's still little rain. November is hot, effectively restricting birding to the early morning and late afternoon. By then, the rain has stopped completely, after which the weather stays dry until June. December to February is generally considered to be the best time to bird in Goa. By then, most of the streams are dry and many forest trees have lost their leaves, making sightings of birds easier. Birding at this time is not limited only to the early hours of the day, and it's good to spend time in the hot hours near pools in the streams that still hold water. March is blooming time for some trees, with great opportunities for photographers. In Goa, with rare exceptions, birds are not hunted for the pot, and with patience you can come fairly close to a flowering tree for stunning photos. From April to early June, while temperatures do not rise much, the humidity is very high. Visibility is short, and any place without a breeze is unpleasant. However, this is the best time for birding in the forests, as the humidity causes the trees to flower and fruit. This is the mango season, and vendors selling their fruits are everywhere. Although some species nest year-round, most nesting activity also takes place in this period. Birds like the Indian peter, which are very hard to spot during the rest of the year, become suddenly very common and are heard calling everywhere. The peter starts calling around 20th of April, and shortly after, it builds a conical-shaped nest out of dry leaves and grasses, with a circular opening on one side, usually not too high off the ground. After the chicks hatch, both parents collect insects to feed their ever more demanding offspring. Feeding continues also after the chicks leave the nest, when the chicks are almost flightless and are very vulnerable. Once considered more as a Western Gat bird, the greater racket-tailed drongo is becoming increasingly common nowadays in the forests of the coastal belt and is seen even in gardens. It breeds during the hot season parallel to the Indian peter. Its cup-shaped nest is simple and is usually built on the branch of a tree. I once saw one bird of a pair with both of its two long-tail rackets missing, and it was thus easy to determine that both parents were taking care in incubating and feeding the young. Water's very scarce towards the end of the dry season, so gardens bordering forests are particularly good if they have bird baths. Birds bathing in early morning, the middle of the day, and about an hour before dark. There are very few perennial streams at this time of year, and these are veritable hives of activity. Birding at this time is generally restricted to early morning and late afternoon, but by the water, activity takes place all day, with good chances for oriental dwarf and blue-eared kingfishers. In the last 15 years, more than 5 field guides to the birds of India have been published, and in many cases they use different names to describe the same birds. This has caused big confusion amongst bird watchers. In naming the birds in this film, we decided to follow the second edition of Birds of the Indian Subcontinent by Grimmett and Inskip 2011. Not that we agree with all the changes in the book, but we do believe that it will be the standard for the coming years. However, for birds that are described as possibly needing to be reclassified into more than one species, or suggest split, we kept the original names following Inskip 1999 in brackets. In making this film, we used 4 different locations in forests, all not more than 20 minutes' drive from Baga, the main tourist resort usually used by birdwatchers. Since we used very heavy equipment, it was not possible to walk in the forest the way birders and still photographers can. In the early days, we used to drive around and stop when we located a bird, get out of the car, set up the tripod and camera, only to find that just as the bird came in focus, it would fly away. We realized that we had to find ways to attract the birds to come to us, so we set up a network of water plates in strategic locations near fruiting and flowering trees, and built a hide at one of these. At the beginning, we used recorded playback to attract birds, but soon realized that in most cases we could only fool the birds once or twice. As we began to understand that we were really disturbing the birds, we gave up on this practice. In the last 15 years of birding in Goa, I've noticed little change in the habitat and distribution of species. Some birds, like blue-faced malkoha and brown fish owl, became rarer, while others, like the blue-bearded bee-eater and Malabar pied hornbill, became more common. Many patches of forest became degraded, and some disappeared altogether under new construction. But most forests have actually increased in size and density since the late 1990s, when the government encouraged the use of subsidized LPG gas, and local people had less need to collect firewood. Some areas, like the upper parts of our poorer woods, became so dense that even birds do not enter them. The most popular forests of the coastal belt of Goa among birdwatchers are Baga Hill, Arpora Woods, Saligaw Spring and Arambal. Except for Arambal, these others have become increasingly degraded and have lost most of their special birds, due both to recent development and, to some extent, overbirding. Yet Goa still has many patches of forest, larger and better than these sites, which local guides prefer to keep secret. If you have the time, drive around and try any patch of forest that looks suitable. You may find a nest of a changeable hawk eagle, or even a new site for the white-naped woodpecker.